am glad to be joined by famous sports agent and really sort of the basis of the Jerry Maguire character, Leigh Steinberg. Hi, Leigh.
Good morning.
I think there's an obvious place to start with this interview, and that is, when is the last time you spoke to your client, Pat Mahomes, and how is he doing?
Recently, and like any injured player, he's focused on returning as quickly as he can.
So Pat Mahomes had the surgery, so now I guess we just wait. One more question based on his mindset. You said, look, he's focused on getting back on the field as soon as possible. Has he talked to you at all about, I assume the goal is to be ready week 1 of next season?
Too early before all the medical examinations are in, to speculate.
There's 2 issues that you've been fairly outspoken on. I want to dig into both of them. The first one is sports betting. We have seen several scandals now, not in the NFL yet, but in both basketball and baseball. What should the leagues be doing differently, if anything, in terms of regulations around what gambling is legal and restricted?
So they have a good set of rules now, but the punishments need to be draconian. Players who violate them need to be separated from the sport. Here's why it's critically important. Gambling and the thought that players will either shave performance or give inside information to gamblers to allow them to cheat is the existential threat to professional sport. Because every time these incidents happen, and for prop betting, you have a player giving inside information to a gambler that he's going to hold himself out of the game or not perform as well, or another player is injured that the public doesn't know, it starts to shake the public faith in the fact that these are real sports with equal competition played on an evening playing field, with both sides trying as hard as they can, and all of a sudden you have wrestling. So we know that bad behavior by athletes doesn't kill professional sports. We've had years of it, and they're more popular than ever. But this one issue was the concept of unintended consequences. So they have to beef up the preparation process where players are scared stiff in terms of knowing to stay away from betting on their own sport, ever interacting with gamblers. We've had a couple cases in baseball, we've had a couple cases in basketball, and they're just going to keep happening unless it's clear that doing so will end your career in sports.
And so you scare them stiff by being very public about what the consequences are and then making them draconian, saying you're out of the sport forever or something of that ilk.
I think the issue is that critical. And yes, we need agents have to be part of it. Players associations have to be part of it. Leagues have to be part of it. But there are numerous opportunities to educate players for why this is destructive, why it's wrong, and why it will end their career.
The other issue I want to talk to you about a little bit that probably requires restrictions, I would imagine, in your mind, is NIL. And we still are, I think, in the early innings of trying to figure out what the right guardrails are to place around NIL and the transfer portal. I'm curious just to ask you kind of open-ended. Are there particular guardrails you feel that should be put in place that are not in place today?
This is another concept of unintended consequences, because the goal was to get athletes from disadvantaged homes who are having problems living on scholarship a few more dollars. They'd have been happy with $5,000 to $10,000, but all of a sudden SB 206 passes in 2020 in California, says that you can compensate athletes and they can have marketing directors. Now you have 15-year-olds branding themselves, marketing themselves, the concept of amateurism, not that it was ever pristine, but it's a long way outside the door. So remember, the quarterback that was the best in this last high school to college class in 2025 recruits quarterback to LSU. Gives him $4 million allegedly in NILs. Then along comes a Michigan alum and gives this player $14 million and he transfers.
Yeah, this
And
is
you got
Bryce Underwood you're talking about.
that's a object lesson in how the system probably shouldn't work because it devolves sports into the haves and the have-nots. So those universities with big alumni backing and business collectives can afford to load up their different programs like Texas Tech did this year, but no one really knows. But I believe that the school with the most NIL money in the country is Ohio State, or the Ohio State, and Ohio State, oddly enough, is favored to win the national championship. So what you're going to see ultimately is a evolution where the top four conferences will play at one level, which will be semi-pro, and everyone else will play at another level. What are the effects on Title IX on campuses? What are the effects on minor sports? And so there was a executive order banning collectives by President Trump, but it really hasn't gone into effect yet. So right now even though next year 22% of the average athletic budget in a conference can be spent on player salaries, it's still the wild, wild west.
So, see, I think that's an interesting take because you come at this from a sports agent's perspective, and sort of the very superficial take on that would be, well, look, I'm in it to get more money for my client, however that may be. But it sounds like maybe you're saying this potentially was a mistake for the game, that had the NCAA just said, look, we're going to give all football players $10,000, that maybe we wouldn't have gone down this route, and maybe that would have been better for the game. Am I putting words in your mouth there?
I think that if the goal in education is to have the maximum amount of students participating in athletics so they get the benefit of the teaching component of what sports can do for someone, and now all of a sudden we have this narrowing where football takes 70% of the of the overall gross coming in for player salaries, and after that college basketball, and then a little portion for female basketball. That's not a totally rational system. And so I'm happy for every player that's getting compensated. I think that it's a free market system, so they deserve that. But there needed to be much more thoughtful pre-planning in how this system would work.
You just published a book. I'm curious to hear how you describe your job as agent. And then maybe if there's maybe it doesn't even need to be from the book. Maybe it can be a story you haven't really shared all that much publicly. But an anecdote that comes to mind, where I mentioned earlier that you're sort of, the movie Jerry Maguire is loosely based off you, and I know you were you were sort of involved in the process of making that movie. But perhaps a real life anecdote that speaks to what the job of agent is, because clearly it's more than just negotiating contracts and endorsement deals.
I need to have honed my listening skills to get into the heart and mind of a young athlete. And men will give you a surface response that's not really deep in terms of getting in touch with their feelings. So I have to be able to penetrate someone's deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams, and put myself in their heart and mind. So in free agency, you have a player, and so you say, what's most important? Is it short-term economic gain, long-term economic security? Is it being in a winning environment? Is it the quality of coaching? And you have people sit there, and they may not make a traditional decision, but part of the book stems on my own battle I had with alcoholism about 16 years ago. And so the premise is life will set you back, whether it's health, whether it's marital problems, life will inevitably crash. And so the first part of the book is how I came back from alcoholism, how I escaped the darkness and depression of those moments to become useful again.
Can you tell me sort of exactly how you spend your time during your day job these days? Because I know that you still represent Pat Mahomes. Is he your only current client?
I have about 12 that I co-agent with Chris Cabot, and then we're involved in working with Polynesian athletes with the Tonga Vailoa family. So no, currently I'm still an active agent, but I've spent a lot of time aggregating health and wellness modalities. So hyperbaric oxygen, stem cell. There's a whole new wave of Bimini and Nanovi. There's an entirely new wave of modalities and protocols and breakthroughs in health and wellness that will elevate the way players can play, get them back quicker from rehab. And of course, we just set up a charitable foundation to try to raise money to do research into traumatic brain injury and concussion. Because I had a crisis of conscience years ago as representing half the starting quarterbacks. And in the NFL, they kept getting hit in the head. And we would go to doctors and ask, how many is too many? When should you retire? And they had no answers. So we've been holding concussion conferences since 1994. And at our Super Bowl party, we had 2 hours of neurologists talking about the state of brain health. And there's now some hope that you can rehabilitate a TBI impaired brain and bring it back to health. So for generations of athletes, not just football, but soccer and hockey and people who fall off horses and cars, this is a major issue. And so I'm trying to fund some new research to make a breakthrough.
So you still have 12. So can you describe how the relationship between you and Pat Mahomes developed initially, and then, you know, what it is today? Because your background, of course, if you look at your clients in the past, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Warren Moon, clearly you have a demonstrated relationship with NFL quarterbacks. And so was it that history that was the foundation of how you got Pat Mahomes as a client?
The basis of our practice is the athlete as role model. And we're looking for athletes that will retrace their roots to the high school, college, and professional level and set up programs that enhance the quality of life. You're also looking for an athlete that will be a self-starter. And the most important quality is how they perform in those critical moments when it's the fourth quarter or the last drive. You're looking for athletes who have the ability to elevate their performance in critical situations. But most important is you share the same values, that you share the same balance, that money's important, but family's critically important, community's important at the end of it. And in a meeting with Patrick Mahomes' parents, which is the first method of contact, it usually comes through the parents. It was clear we shared all those values. And so we met several times with the parents, and then ultimately when the season ended with Patrick, and there was a mesh of values. And of course, you know, I've represented 64 first round draft picks and the very first pick in the draft 8 years. And 12 players in the Hall of Fame. So all that's helpful in allowing the athlete to visualize what his life might be like if you're working with them.
I want to go back to the question I asked a few minutes ago. Is there a specific story that comes to mind for you that encapsulates the job of agent in a way that gets beyond just the contracts?
It's trying to plot a life arc for the athlete. What other talents and skills do you have besides athletic ones? So when the career's over, do you want to go into coaching? Do you want to go into broadcast? Do you want to go into business? Do you want to? So Warwick Dunn, a former client of ours, owns part of a former running back owns part of the Atlanta Falcons. He has a small piece, and so, or Steve Young and Brent Jones have multi-billion-dollar hedge funds. So it's conceptualizing what the rest of their life is going to be like. And if you've established a player with a charitable foundation, so that same work done put over 200 single mothers and their families into the first home they'll ever own by making the down payment, or Mahomes has 16 and 15 in the Mahomes, which helps at-risk kids, kids that are hungry, kids in hospitals. So it's weaving a player into the community that they play in, retracing their roots, laying out a lifetime plan that fits each individual in terms of who they uniquely are, not generically. And so my job's really not over until Troy Aikman's a broadcaster on television, or Desmond Howard on game day. So it's plotting each element of that, because we know that with an injury, player can be hurt. So it's holistic. It's having a total view of that athlete. And it's I've been in the weddings of a number of my clients. When I got married, they were in my wedding. So these are close relationships, unlike what you'd have as a traditional lawyer. And sometimes it's being there for athletes in the worst of times. So obviously that was a setback on Sunday with Patrick Mahomes. So you need to support that athlete in their critical moments, not just in success, but when they're ailing.
So what has Pat Mahomes told you about what he wants to do post NFL life? Have you had that conversation with him, or is it just more or less, look, I'm going to play for 10 more years?
Oh, he's got a whole series. This is a very, very bright young man. So he's hyper focused on doing everything he can to win. But, if he owns part of the local baseball team, he was part of the local soccer team. So he's a very thoughtful person that's diversified.
We spoke to him at CNBC Sport a few months ago. He's also at least kind of hinted that he would love to be an NFL owner one day. Of course, I don't know. You have to have a certain amount of money to be an NFL owner. It's another subject I've talked to Eli Manning about, where he tried to get a piece of the New York Giants, and he basically said, hey, I couldn't afford it anymore. Like, it just priced me out. But you mentioned there is, you do have some background with a player taking a minority stake in ownership. Is that something you can prepare a player for as an agent?
So I told you about Warwick Dunn. I had another player, Ray Childress, who owned a small piece. These are $5 billion, $10 billion purchases. So that we're talking about a small piece, but Brady owns part of the Raiders. We had Ray Childress. The first one who did it was my client, Deron Cherry, who owned a small part of Jacksonville Jaguar. This generation can be the owners. This generation can do that. So, what are you looking for? An athlete who not only is prolific on the field but off, someone who represents the community well, and then someone who's close to the current owner. So the time to be cultivating that is now.
We've talked about NFL. I do also want to ask you about both Major League Baseball and the WNBA, because both of those leagues are staring at potential work stoppages. How damaging do you think it would be for either of those leagues if we actually saw a delayed opening to either of their seasons?
So in 1994, after baseball went on strike, the gross receipts went down by 40% the next season. Having a work stoppage is a disaster. No one feels any empathy for collective bargaining that has millionaires fighting with billionaires, right? So the fans feel screened off from that. That business needs to be kept private. The time to work on new labor contracts is to lead the process by years so that you don't come up against it. It took the home run race with Barry Bonds, first Sosa and McGuire, to bring back baseball. And it took a while. Now, because they've had labor peace, they've quintupled their gross. Women's sports is having a dramatic breakthrough on many different fronts. Caitlin Clark single-handedly made women's sports hot and sexy, interesting, and that league is just taken off in terms of pop. It would be a stillbirth that would be stillborn to hurt themselves. Hockey has learned this lesson. Every time they get to a great growth point, they have a lockout. So this is the last thing you ever want to do. The real battle in sports is not labor versus management. It's the battle for revenue against Walt Disney World and Netflix and other sports. It's a battle for consumer dollar. Don't rub into the face of fans the excessive wealth that's in professional sports.
Well, let me just play devil's advocate for you for a second on the women's side, right? Because their argument is that we aren't wealthy. We haven't been getting paid all that much. The highest salary is $225,000 a year. So now is our moment to finally get paid all this money. I guess what you're arguing is that it still is not worth it for the players to go that far to say we're striking, we're not playing. We should take some sort of compromise if it means we have to compromise in order to make sure that our season gets played on time.
Let me clarify. Women's basketball players have a exceptionally strong case for why they should be compensated at a higher level. You can threaten a strike. All I'm suggesting is that women's basketball is growing by leaps and bounds in popularity. You don't want to have a missed season. So we're just talking tactics here. The end goal is to get those women compensated at a fair level. But my point is, you can threaten a strike, but you don't have to go to that limit. It's like mutually assured destruction in the nuclear arms race, right? Both sides have them. Neither side wants to be completely wiped out, so they have them, but they don't use them. And so you can have the threat of work stoppage, but rational minds ought to be able to make a difference. And the people who run women's basketball have got to see that it's in their interest to continue play. And rational minds need to put pressure on themselves to get a deal done early, so it never comes to that.
Last question for you, Leigh. When you first started in the sports agency business, about 1975 or so, there wasn't really much of a sports agency business, right? I mean, it was sort of, at least in its early gestation periods. I heard you say on another interview, it was very, sometimes the team owners or league executives would just hang up the phone on an agent because it wasn't a business yet. Now we have progressed to the point where I would imagine there are several generations of agents who look to you to provide advice to them. Do you sort of have a go-to piece of advice that you give wannabe sports agents?
So I do agent academies, which we've done about 35 of. And we take a group of young business students, law students, sports management people, and we teach them how to recruit. And they have to recruit an actual athlete. It's been Warren Moon or Pat Mahomes' mother, or they have to actually get out and recruit. We have a negotiation seminar. We have a branding and marketing exercise. We have a charitable foundation that they have to set up. So I've been training this next generation, thousands of young people, to try to be ethical, principled. And the first piece of advice is what I said to you before: hone your listening skills so that you can get in the heart and mind of a prospective client. Put yourself in the other person's heart and mind. So if you're negotiating, you're thinking about, what does that owner or general manager need to make this a good deal for him? How can we craft win-win interactions?
Leigh, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.